Hi, seniors. My name is Nicole Adach, and I'm a mental skills coach. Thank you for tuning in and listening to this recording, watching it, however you're accessing this. I'm here today to essentially help you all better understand, maybe get a little bit of support around this concept of athletic identity and what athletic identity is, and then more importantly, how it impacts us as we are learning to navigate this new norm of life. So going from being competitive athletes full-time in college to all of a sudden not being competitive athletes anymore, that's a huge transition that a lot of people don't put enough attention to. So I'm here today to, again, offer a little bit of insight, a little bit of understanding, identity as a whole. What is identity? How do we develop our own identities? And then starting to understand how being an athlete has shaped our identity, and then what all of that means and what all of that leads to as we kind of transition between phases of life. So you guys are all in this process going from being a college student, full-time athlete, to all of a sudden going into the real world, or the working world, where you're no longer on a sports team, you're no longer an athlete. So who are you? So today is all about, again, the idea of athletic identity, how it comes to be, where it comes from, how it helps us, how it hurts us, and really what can we do about all of this that we're experiencing at once. It's pretty overwhelming for a lot of athletes. A lot of the individuals that I work with in my role as a mental skills coach experience transitions, and the most dramatic, and rightfully so, the most dramatic transition that I experience with my athletes is this transition out of sport. We build up our mental skills to be our very best on the field, on the court, on the ice, in the pool, but we never really talk about, how to actually utilize those mental skills to then show up our best out of sport. So our athletic identity ultimately impacts a lot more than I think we give it credit for. So again, today is all about you seniors and your experience navigating this new norm of not having a sport as your primary job. So I'm here to offer any support that I can. I have a presentation that I'm going to kind of pull up in a moment, and I'm just going to go over a little bit of information about where identity comes from a psychological perspective, and then break down kind of what that means for you, and then how you can use this information to help yourselves as you transition out of your sport careers. I do want to just say quickly that, my role as a mental skills coach is very performance heavy, but what I really try to emphasize with my clients is this idea of becoming your best self. And now, becoming your best self, yes, that can be performance wise on the court and the field athletically, but being your best self applies everywhere, in your relationships, in your job, in your way of taking care of yourself. Being your best is being your best. It doesn't only include sport performance. So I kind of want to just set the tone a little bit with that a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is how to use what you've learned through your sport to help you as you kind of navigate life. But I do also want to say that this specific topic of athletic identity is something that I am very passionate about. I studied this for my graduate thesis. I'm a major paper for the graduate program at St. Mike's in clinical psychology. And I really got to dive deep into identity construction in general. What is identity? Where does it come from? Why do we all have different identities? And do we change our identity throughout life, or do we kind of keep the same identity? So I'm super passionate about this. And I think that the idea of athletic identity is something that's not touched on enough. So I'm really excited to be able to share with you guys something I'm super passionate about. I know for me, I had a hard time transitioning out of sport and into this new norm, new life of not playing a sport every day. So I'm hoping that what I can offer today is something that maybe I didn't get when I was an athlete. But I'm going to say this at the end of the presentation, but I really just want to urge all of you, if you're struggling, if you're having a hard time, if you want to know more, reach out to me, contact me. That's what I'm here for. That's why I am at St. Mike's in the role that I am. And I just want to be a support for all of you as you discover life and who you are beyond your sport. It's not an easy process. It's not always a fun process. So I do want to just offer myself to all of you. But without further ado, I will get into the presentation portion, so this doesn't take too long. But I'm excited to help. I'm excited to offer support, offer information, guidance, whatever you might need. I'm hoping this presentation gives you. All right, so I'm going to pull up the presentation now so that I can just share it with all of you and be able to begin offering as much support as I can. Okay, so the first slide here. Athletic identity. As I said, we're going to talk about what it is, you know, figuring out who you are beyond your role of student athlete at St. Mike's. So how does it impact you? And then ultimately, how to apply the qualities that you learned through your sport, the values, the lessons, the assets of who you are, how to apply all of those things to the next chapter of your life and for the chapters to come. So the first thing I want to start with is this idea of subjective reality. This is a phrase that I use all the time that I think is truly a powerful phrase that not a lot of people understand what I mean when I say. So I do want to break it down a little bit because I think this is at the crux, at the foundation of how we identify ourselves, how we understand ourselves. So subjective reality is essentially this idea that, you know, our experiences shape our understanding of who we are and the world we live in. So based on our own experiences, our own relationships, our own histories, that kind of shapes our understanding of what is true, what is real. So an example I will use that I use often is, which I'm sure a lot of you can understand. I was a kiddo age 6 when I started playing basketball. And growing up, before, I had a sister who was 3 years older than me, and she just played basketball since I can remember for our local church team. My dad was the coach. So when I turned 6 and I was old enough to play the sport, I don't think I really had, you know, a decision to make, you know, are you gonna play a sport or not? It was just known that I was going to. My reality was very clear that I was gonna play basketball for my local church team, and my dad was gonna be my coach, and that was that. That was just the norm because of the experiences that I had had. Some of you skiers, ice hockey players, those like sports where there's a lot of tactical and technical skills you need to know. I talked to some athletes who started their sport at age 2. Age 2. So from 2 years on, you're kind of just put into the world knowing that, yeah, I'm gonna go on skates. Yeah, it's normal. So subjective reality is really based upon what your experiences are. So here it says on the slide, you know, personal experiences that shape our understanding of the world and how we fit in. So my experience of life is very different than someone who perhaps was brought up in a different part of the country, not playing sports. So my reality is very subjective to my own experiences. So something to kind of start this presentation, I really want you all to think about, you know, I wrote food for thought, but what I really want you to start to reflect on is what subjective realities you might have. What are some norms that you've experienced all your life that you've never really thought of that are just part of who you are? You know, for me, it's, you know, the church I went to growing up, parents who have been married for 30 years, playing sports, going to college. All of these things were very normal, but they're not normal for everyone. So what are some subjective realities that you have all been exposed to and that have kind of shaped your understanding of the world? It's something to think about. And it really is, like I said, at the crux of identity development, because based on our subjective realities and how we understand the world, that's going to start to influence how we see ourselves fitting into this world. So without going too much into that, I do want to talk right about identity. So what is identity? Identity is essentially our values and our history coming together. So identity construction is the process of defining ourselves, the process that allows us to figure out who we are in this world. What do we want to be? Who do we want to be? What do we want to do? How do we fit in? That's the construction. The construction is the process of figuring out. And that process begins in adolescence. So, you know, approximately ages 12 to 19. And the reason why adolescence is kind of the age where identity is kind of really talked most highly about is because ages 12 to 19, age 12 specifically, that's when an individual is pretty much able to figure out who they are and that the world is complex and that they're a person, they have autonomy, they're independent, they can make their own decisions, they can be their own person. So this stage of development, adolescence, which you're going to see in this slide here, which is kind of boxed in red, adolescence is those teen years. And this is issue, but the primary function of adolescence is to really understand our identity and to really understand who we are. So part of, this psychosocial stage of development, Erik Erikson was a social psychologist, and he developed the stages of development. Love of develop. He created these stages of development where we go from infancy to late adulthood, and each stage of life is kind of characterized by an experience or experiences. So adolescence from 12 to 19, like I had said, that's essentially when identity is something that really begins to be looked at, right? So we start to really ask ourselves, who am I? What do I want to do? Who do I want to be? And as I said before, with subjective reality, our identity is truly, truly tied up between what we've experienced internally in our heads and our minds and our hearts, and externally in our environments. So some internal factors that influence our identity, things like perceptions, how we see the world, how we see ourselves, autonomy, our understanding of our independence, what belief systems we might have, what's valuable to us, what are our own personal values, being a good person, whatever it might be, and how we make sense of ourselves in this world. So examples for internal factors, I hate that I have to continue to use myself as an example, but there's no one here to talk to besides me. Internally, I had the understanding that I was independent as a kiddo, a 12-year-old. I can make decisions, right? Whether that's getting in trouble or not, but, pushing the limits, figuring out what's okay, what's not okay. I had perceptions of kind of what I wanted to be and who I wanted to be. Belief systems, values. I've always valued the idea of being a good person. So I was brought up in this environment where I wanted to be a good person. And so I started to make sense of myself in that way. I want to be a good person. I want to be successful, and as a 12-year-old, that looks very different than now as a 29-year-old. But essentially, these internal factors, all that go on between the ears, those factors really do impact how we begin to identify ourselves. And then there are also external factors. So external factors include our family and our upbringing. So again, are you a family with two parents? Are you a single parent home? Are you raised by your grandparents? Have you been adopted? Are you with your biological parents? Do your parents, have certain expectations of you? Do you experience really loving family? Is it more aggressive and violent? All of these different experiences that we kind of just take for granted, all of those experiences really impact how we ultimately identify ourselves. Things like cultural norms and social expectations. So again, I was brought up in a church, so it was very normal for me to go to mass, and I still do to this day because that was just what I was brought up in. Those external factors really stuck with me, and I ended up internalizing the external societal expectations of being in church, and now internally, I believe that those are core values for me. So being able to see that there are both internal and external factors. So again, external factors also include, social experiences, the people we surround ourselves with. And the last bullet here is what we're going to talk most about today, activities that we're involved in. The activities that we're involved with strongly impact how we see the world and how we see ourselves in the world. So from the get-go, I want you to see here that the activities that we're involved in, sports, those impact us strongly, for better or worse. But if we experience a lot of our young age or our young selves, if we experience a lot of time in a certain activity, we're more likely to use that activity as being able to describe who we are, what the world's like. So a lot of factors go into kind of identifying ourselves and who we are. So that's all very, general, these internal, external factors. What I want to talk specifically about today with all of you is this idea of athletic identity. So I'm going to do this. So athletic identity. Athletic identity is the degree to which an individual identifies in that athlete role. So again, identity construction is the process of figuring out, and athletic identity is how strongly we identify as an athlete. So again, that example, I am a basketball player versus, yes, I play basketball. Those are two very different experiences of participation in sport. Someone with a really strong and high degree of athletic identity is someone who says, yeah, I'm a basketball player, period. Someone who has maybe less of a connection or, I don't want to use the word weaker, but a a slighter degree of athletic identity is someone who says, yes, I'm Nicole, I go to St. Michael's College, I play basketball. That person who just plays basketball, that person has less of a degree of athletic identity, meaning that their whole identity is not just as an athlete. So I want to break down a little bit about the experience of developing as an athlete. So I want you all to, for a second, think about the general timing in the sports world of when we're kind of told that we need to give 100% of ourselves to our sport, right? So I remember when I was 12, I started playing AAU basketball. And at that age, that's kind of like when you're told like, hey, Sally down the street is giving 110%. If you're not giving 110%, she's going to get better than you. So at age 12, 13, that's when it starts getting real. When you have to kind of make a decision, like, do you want to commit to this sport or do you want to play socially? And that's a pretty young age, but that age 12, 13, when most of us are starting to decide, yeah, I want to take this seriously, that's the exact same age, if you guys can remember from just a few slides ago, that's the exact same age here of when we're understanding who we are, our identity, our adolescence, right? So at the same age that we are adolescents and figuring out who we are in this world, that's the same age that we're essentially told by coaches, families, leagues, that we need to decide that we're committed to our sport. So it's really easy for young athletes to tie who they are to what they do. So for me, 12-year-old girl, I really loved basketball. I wanted to be committed. I wanted to be good. And I'm actually at the age where I can understand myself in the world. I'm tying in what I do and who I am. So who are you? I'm a basketball player. And then on top of that, layer in the social and environmental influences that we have. So these external, again, factors that encourage us to strongly identify with our sport. So again, the coaches who always told me, give 100% of yourself, or if you're not working hard, someone else is, or, you know, great job, you're really, really good on the court. I want you to keep that up. Okay, so I keep that up. So we're really, we get positive feedback and we get encouragement and reinforcement to keep pushing all of our being into being a good athlete. Now that's setting an athlete up to really strongly identify as an athlete, which then turns into a really strong athletic identity. It's just kind of how our culture works, but our sport culture is so encouraging and reinforcing in giving your all to something. You know, we celebrate it. If someone gives 150%, we're celebrating them. We're like so impressed and we're admiring them and they're inspiring because they've given all of themselves to their sport. What they do is who they are. So it's a high degree of athletic identity. We're going to talk in a bit about good and bad things that can come from that. But what I really want to just emphasize here is just how it comes to be, right? We identify ourselves through our experiences in life. And if one of our major experiences in life is being part of a sports team, and we're encouraged to continue to be an athlete all the time and give our all, then we're going to strongly identify as being an athlete. So what I want to look at now is this idea of development and how we actually come to be who we are. So again, athletic identity exists on a spectrum, right? From the really high athletic identity, I am an athlete and that's it, to like, yeah, I'm an athlete, I play sports and I also am this, I'm also that. There's a lot of different variants that, there's a lot of variance that comes between different degrees of athletic identity. That being said, as we're developing as young people, I want to really clearly state that there is not one way that we all develop. We don't just all develop as athletes and that's it all the time and that's it, period, end of story. We're all different, right? There are different processes for developing, which is why the title of this slide is the processes of development. We don't just all develop in one way. One developmental process I do want to talk about with you guys specifically is what's called precocious development. Precocious development is essentially foreclosed identity, or creating a foreclosed identity. So prematurely deciding who we are, and that's it. We're not exploring. I'm not looking for anything else. I'm good with just being a basketball player, and that's it. So for me as a 13-year-old, I played AAU. I was getting better and better every year. So all I cared about was sports. So I didn't say, you know what, I also kind of want to look for other avenues and areas of my life that I can be really good at. I didn't pursue other areas. Academically, I did well, naturally, thankfully. I was a good student. I did my homework, but the purpose of doing homework was so I can go to practice. So I was very one-track mind. So what can lead to this precocious or premature identity development where you're foreclosed, this is who I am and that's it? Things like social reinforcements, sport culture, expectations, again, our subjective realities. If I get good, feedback and praise from people because I'm a good athlete and I'm so committed, I'm going to keep doing that. I'm not going to look to also be, a science honor society member. I'm just going to look at sports and that is it. So it's easy to develop in this precocious way when you're in the sport world because the sport culture is very cutthroat, very, it honors the diligence and the 110% of your self effort that people give. Because it does that, it makes young athletes want to continue to just focus on that area of who they are. So naturally, when you're developing as an athlete and all you are is just an athlete, the one thing we know for sure as athletes, as people, especially as athletes though, is that disruptions occur, disturbances occur, and someday we're not going to be participating actively in sport. I know for certain, I can say this now as a 29-year-old, I know for certain that I am not always going to be an active competitive basketball player. I'm not right now. However, at age 21, there was not a question in my mind. I was just always going to play basketball. I didn't think about it. So it's funny, looking back in hindsight, of course, 2020, but I look back in hindsight and I think, okay, I could have really prepared myself a little bit better for what was to come. However, because I was precociously developed as an athlete and I had this foreclosed identity as just a basketball player, I never allowed myself space to kind of explore and discover who else I was. So the inevitable, again, is that there is going to be some ending to this experience of being an athlete. So the question then comes up, what happens when our careers come to an end? You're all experiencing an end to an era of your lives. For some of you, it might feel like the end of life as you know it, the end of the world. Oh my God, what now? Others might think, okay, that chapter's closing, moving on. But one thing that stays consistent is that the end is being experienced. And that's really hard for a lot of people to swallow. I think it's really important for athletes to really question and reflect on what it means to be an athlete, what it means to not participate anymore, and what that looks like, and how life looks with sport and without sport, because ultimately you're going to experience life with and without. But we never really think about the without because we're just so focused on sport. So what are some kinds of disturbances and disruptions that we experience as athletes? I say to identity here, but really to athletic identity. So there are voluntary or conscious things that can happen that can impact our participation in sport. Things like ending your career and retiring, deciding that you no longer want to play your sport. Maybe after your first year of college, you're like, you know what, this isn't worth it for me. Those are more voluntary, conscious. Involuntary and unconscious disruptions include injury. We never plan for injury, right? You never go onto the field for a soccer game and say, you know what, today I'm going to tear my ACL. No one says that to themselves. So being able to understand that there are some involuntary things that happen that disrupt our identity. Not making a team is another example. And honestly, for you spring athletes, I would also put you under here as involuntary, unconscious disruptions. You thought you had a whole season left and you all of a sudden don't. That's something you can never plan for. You can never say that you were prepared fully to leave your sport because you thought you had a whole season. So that's a little bit more of an involuntary than a voluntary disruption. But ultimately, what I want to kind of grasp here, what I want you to grasp here, is that our ends of our careers really do differ depending on the person. but that there are a lot of different ways that we experience disruption. And one thing I want you all to think about, actually, especially for those of you who've experienced injury before, think back, reflect on an experience that you've had where there was a disruption to your athletic participation and your athletic identity. You know, I've worked with a lot of injured athletes, and a lot of injured athletes say that it was a blessing in disguise looking back, because they're able to see other parts of themselves and really kind of pull together who they are beyond their sport itself. Um, so I want you all to start to think about these disruptions you've experienced in your life, especially if you've been injured, and to figure out, like, what did you learn in that process? How did you kind of get through it? What helped? What did you discover about yourself? Because having those experiences can certainly help you as you navigate the end of a career. So moving forward, it's important to recognize that there are different degrees, again, just like everything else, different degrees of what it will be like when you transition out of your sport. For some athletes, transitioning out of their sport is the worst thing they could ever imagine. The day they never wanted to see come, they wanted to avoid, they wanted to stay, they never wanted to experience what it's like to never have to put on their shoes again. Other athletes on the other end of things, the other extreme, is they're ready. They're like so moved on, like, goodbye sport. I'm ready to put those shoes away forever, and I'm moving on to the next phase of my life. I don't have to look back. I know that chapter's closed, moving on. But the point here is that there is, again, variety. Some athletes experience, oh my God, this is the worst. Other athletes experience, all right, what next? So there is variety in how you experience transition out of sport. But the important thing to know is that you're all feeling, I'm imagining, some sense of loss, some sense of, okay, I'm losing my participation in sports. So part of my identity is being taken from me. So I do want to touch really quickly on the stages of grief. The stages of grief are something, it's a way to kind of construct your understanding when you're mourning the loss of something. So for all of you senior athletes who are mourning the loss of your athletic careers and your athletic identity, there are different stages of grief that you go through. There's no particular order. There's no right way of experiencing this, but it's important just to note that you will all experience this at some point. The first stage is denial. Denial is when you're not ready to even think about the next stage of life. So again, if you look at the slide before, the day that you want to avoid the most, that's denial, 100%. You're not even ready to think about it. When I was a senior athlete, my last basketball game, my mom asked me how I was feeling because she knew that it was my last game. And I laughed and said that that wasn't my last game. We didn't make playoffs. I was a senior. I wasn't going to the WNBA. So it was my last game, but I was in such denial that I didn't even think about it. I wasn't even allowing myself to go there. That's denial. Anger is another stage of grief. And anger is when you're just mad. You're angry. You're frustrated. You're pissed. You're just mad. There's no better word to describe it. Bargaining. That's when you start to think, oh, if only I could have, I should have, I would have. Well, what if I keep playing and shooting? Like for me, basketball, what if I keep shooting on the gun and doing drills in the gym? Maybe I'll be able to play someday somewhere else. That's bargaining. Depression is when you're sad. You're feeling that loss. You're upset. You know it's over, and you're really sad about it, unmotivated, you're withdrawn, those symptoms of depression. And then acceptance is that last stage of grief. Acceptance is when you're not necessarily okay with how things are, but you're accepting that this is how things are. And again, with the stages of grief, you can go through all the stages and go back to one. You can go in all sorts of orders. You can feel like you're finally accepting it, and then the next day you can feel like you're angry again. All okay. All different experiences of how we handle loss. So if we're moving on here, what can happen to identity during times of change? This is a long slide, so I'm actually going to take this slide off from your screen. I'm going to go back to myself. So essentially, when you lose something, when you lose your identity specifically, and you're no longer tied to what you've always known yourself to be, there's a spectrum of what you experience for your identity. And that spectrum goes from identity confusion. So identity confusion is kind of like being uncertain of what's next, but exploring, keep open-minded. I'm looking for other layers to add to who I am, what I do, and what I want to do, and who I want to be. That's identity confusion, right? So A perfect example is, again, adolescence. You're an adolescent, you're figuring out who you are. There's a lot of identity confusion going on. Who am I? What do I want to do? Oh, I actually don't like that. I want to do something else. So that's identity confusion. Identity crisis is like the next bump up, right? If it's a tier system. And identity crisis is also very, very normal. I'm almost certain that all of you, most of you, are experiencing some degree or will experience some degree of identity crisis. Identity crisis is characterized by uncertainty, characterized by confusion, maybe a little bit of chaos, but still this optimistic mindset of like, I'm so confused of where I am right now and who I am, but I'm figuring it out. I'm doing my best to figure it out. And, you know, again, chaotic at times, but also exploratory. You're figuring it out. There's opportunity for growth. The third tier of identity transitions and kind of dealing with change is what's called identity diffusion. And identity diffusion is a really scary thing. It is not like identity confusion or crisis, where it's kind of normal, expected, you go through it, it's a phase, you get over it. Identity diffusion is when you're in a constant state of crisis. So there's psychological turmoil, there's chaos, there's uncertainty, there's confusion, inconsistency. And this is when like things like your mental health, your physical health, your motivation, things really start to slip because you are so overwhelmed here that you don't really understand who you are. You don't see who you're going to be. Your identity's been ripped away and that's it. So you're just nowhere. You feel metaphorically lost. So if I go back to the slide for a second and I show you guys that continuum that I drew out, you want to see here, oh God, you want to see in the continuum that there is, where the heck is it? Oh, great, there's a black dot here, that there is confusion, crisis, and diffusion. So diffusion is persistent, it's not healthy, it's not great, it really harps on our mental health and really impacts us negatively. It's something that, you know, it can happen, but it certainly is not normal and does not have to happen. Identity confusion and crisis do just happen. It's a normal part of life. So what I want to talk about now is athletic identity, having a strong sense of athletic identity, a strong degree of athletic identity, really defining yourself in that athlete role. I want to talk about how that can really help us, because there are a ton of good things that can come from strongly identifying in your athlete role, right? There are things like being passionate, really caring about something, being disciplined, being committed to something, being on a team, having that support system around you, that sense of community and appreciation and connection. There's a sense of purpose. You learn these mental skills that I always talk about, you know, things like responding to situations and difficulties instead of just reacting with our emotions. You learn the importance of physical health, right? Psychological health, stress management, time management, all these great things that you have to learn when you're really strongly identifying in your athlete role. So the list can go on and on for all the really, really good things that can come from being strongly devoted to your athlete role and strongly identifying as such. Again, athletic identity in a high degree is not a bad thing. It's a great thing. If you are one of those athletes who strongly identifies as an athlete and you're struggling right now because something's been pulled from you, it's okay, right? There's still a lot of really great stuff that has kind of come to you because of this. And there's also a lot of opportunity to kind of reflect here and think about, you know, thank God I was a really devoted athlete because I learned so much about myself in sport and I have no regrets, right? There are really, really good things that can come from being strongly identified through your sport. That being said, I'm going to go to the slide now with that list of benefits from being a strong, a high degree of athletic identity. Let's see here. Yep, a focus on goals, having those benefits such as confidence, purpose, stress management, like I said, psychological benefits, commitment, all of that stuff is really, really great. However, there are things that can go wrong when you strongly identify as an athlete. So I'm going to touch on this stuff a little bit. I wish that I talked about this with someone when I was a senior athlete. I thought that my world was ending. I literally was like, oh my God, all I've ever known and cared about is sport. What now? And, I didn't even get to put it to words, which is even more fascinating. I just kind of like took it in as like, okay, this is the end. And that's it. No one really talked to me about it. So again, that's why I'm here, is why I'm passionate about this, because it needs to be talked about. So things that can go wrong when you're strongly identifying as an athlete. That unidimensional self-identification, the first bullet. When you identify strongly as an athlete, you're not looking for anything else to define you, to help define you. So you ultimately get stuck in this idea of like, I am just an athlete and that's it. So when that athlete role gets taken away, the second bullet, there's a difficulty when that's disturbed or when that's disrupted. So when the athlete role gets taken away from you, all of a sudden you have a hard time because all you've ever known is being an athlete. Other things that could go wrong is overcommitment. I don't love that phrase. Overtraining is very real. Being imbalanced and just, again, that one track mind, that can really haunt us. I know I work with a lot of athletes who are very much overtraining, and it's scary because their mindset is, I have to keep doing more. I'm not satisfied. Keep doing more, keep doing more, keep doing more. And ultimately, a lot of these athletes who keep doing more, they do a lot of the physical stuff over and over again. There's other facets of training you can get into, your nutrition, your self-care, your mental skills, your mental health that can help your performances. But a lot of athletes think just physical. So overtraining is a very high possibility. Limited exploration of external interests. So not thinking, well, what else do I have going? Maybe I want to go to my friend's house on a Friday night and hang out, watch a movie, have some popcorn. Someone who is strongly identifying as an athlete and only sees themselves through that lens, that person might be less likely to socialize and honestly might be more likely to go work on their game. Now, while that might be great, again, going back to that second bullet, that makes it really hard for them to then be able to get over the end of their career, an injury, things like that. And then finally, their mental health of the athlete who is strongly identifying as an athlete. There's a man at Springfield College, Britt Brewer. He's a psychologist. He is a strong advocate for the understanding and the better understanding of what athletic identity is and how it impacts us. And essentially, in a study that he conducted, it was found that individuals who perform poorly, if they are strongly identifying as an athlete and they perform poorly in that role, then they're more vulnerable to feeling depressed. So what that basically means is that if you only value yourself based on your production on the court, on the field, on the ice, in the pool, mountain, etc., in the diamond, if you're only valuing yourself based on your performance there, if you have bad performance, your mental health is going to deteriorate. I'm sure a lot of you, just like myself, have had experiences where you have a bad performance and then your mood's shot for the rest of the week. It's not like, oh, I had a bad day on the court. Oh, well, moving on to the next phase of my day. No, it's like, I had a bad performance. I'm in a pissed off mood for the rest of the week until I can prove myself on the court next week. So mental health can really take a toll when we're strongly identified as athletes. So things for you to think about. Again, that unidimensional self-identity and self-concept. Do you have a one-track mind? These are questions to ask yourselves, or thinking about other athletes you know. Do other obligations seem to be distractions? Again, is your mood congruent with how you perform in your sport? So I'll give a short example here. When I was in 8th grade, so 8th grade is like 14, I think. Again, in the adolescent phase of figuring out who I am. When I was in 8th grade, I was on an AAU basketball team that was a pretty competitive team. I would travel throughout the Northeast, the United States. And in the spring, when AAU season happens, there was an 8th grade dance at my school. Now, I was friends with a lot of athletes, but a lot of my friends were also girly girls. And so we had an 8th grade dance. All the girls got super excited, buying dresses, getting ready, wearing makeup for the first time, just getting really excited for this dance. And I had a decision to make. The dance happened to fall on the same night as a basketball tournament that I had to play in. Um, and I had to make a choice. My parents left it up to me. They said, listen, 8th grade dance is that night. I understand either way, if you want to go to your game or if you want to go to the dance. Either way is fine. Parents were very supportive. However, my one-track mind was like, dance, that's totally distracting to what I really want to do. I want to go play basketball. So I went to my basketball tournament and my friends got really mad at me. I actually remember, this is 8th grade. I remember my friends like totally like yelling at me because I chose a sport over them, over the dance. They didn't understand that my mind was just so made up on being an athlete that that's all I cared about. They didn't get it, right? So for me, the dance is a distraction, something that totally didn't have to do with me getting better as an athlete, therefore not having to do with me getting better as a person. So I just totally pushed that aside and stayed true to who I believed I was, a basketball player. And I went to my tournament, I never looked back, and that was that. So a lot of times social obligations feel like distractions to those of us who strongly identify as athletes. So for you all to just kind of check in with yourselves, ask yourselves, am I the kind of athlete who finds all things not athlete specific to be distracting? Because if you are, you're probably more likely to experience some sort of difficulty as you navigate this new norm of not playing a sport. So again, there are benefits and there are detriments to playing a sport and being highly defined through that role of being an athlete, good and bad things. And then also subjective reality. So things like expectations and cultural norms, what's expected of you. If your coach expects you never to miss a practice, then more than likely you're going to never miss a practice. More than likely your identity as an athlete is going to strengthen. So what can we do? Now that we know that identity comes from our experiences growing up, and every little experience we've experienced, every interaction we've had, every relationship, every conversation we've had has impacted our understanding of the world and who we are in the world. And that then in turn leads to us developing our identity, right? So if you're an athlete who's like, now that I think back, I strongly identify as being an athlete. What now? What do I do? I'm stuck. I'm a goner. I'm done for. Whatever you might be thinking, there are still things we can do to help you and that you can do to help you. So I'll start by just saying that I have a laundry list of things for coaches and athletic departments to offer to their student athletes, including, mental health professionals, having good coaching philosophies that go beyond sport itself. Encouraging athletes to be well-rounded individuals. That's why that phrase student athlete is very important, because being a student and an athlete are equally tied together. They're both important. Having good rapport between athletes and staff, being able to have that conversation with your coaches, feel like you're more important than just how you produce on the court. Just if you have a bad game, it doesn't mean that the coach doesn't like you anymore. It doesn't mean you're not valuable as a person at the institution anymore. Not at all. So having good rapport between your coaches and your players is super important. Being able to identify transferable skills. So again, mental skills that are learned through sport involvement. And then again, sport involvement, teaching how to positively cope with stress and setbacks and develop those mental skills to help us through difficult situations. So I'm not going to get into detail with that with all of you, but there is a lot that coaches and athletic departments can do. For you all as athletes, it seems like a smaller slide, but it is very, very important. I can't say it enough, to get to know yourselves. And I wrote here, do the mental work to understand yourself. So if you think about like physical work for a second, you think about squatting, lunging, bench press, deadlift, pull-ups, whatever it might be. When you really put the work in, you feel it physically, it fatigues you, right? It gets you sore maybe. It makes you feel depleted of your resources. You're just done. You're so tired. Same thing goes for the mental work. There's no magic pill here. There's no magic wand. If there was, I'd wave it at all of you. But the only way to develop mentally and understand all of this is to do that mental work. So again, it might fatigue you, it might feel awkward, it might feel uncomfortable, make us feel sore mentally. But it's really important to do this work. And that starts with recognizing how you feel now. How do you feel right now today, being done with your athletic career? It's really important to really nail down how we feel. We can't work through how we feel until we know how it is that we're feeling. So how do you feel? How do you want to feel? What would be better? And then what do you need in order to feel that way? So if you're feeling super confused and frustrated, and maybe you want to feel a sense of calm, ask yourself, what things can I do that'll help me feel calm? So one tool that I like to use with my athletes and with all of my clients is this. This is what's called an emotion wheel. Now, this is not an all-extensive and all-inclusive list of emotions, but it's a pretty good start. You'll see that it's categorized by different emotions and feelings, right? From sadness, happiness, surprise, fear, anger, disgust, and then it kind of branches out from there. So for athletes like yourselves, it's important to acknowledge that you may be feeling a sense of, I'm just getting my little marker ready. You may be feeling a sense of sadness, right? See that here, sadness? It's important for you then to ask yourselves, all right, if I'm feeling sad, you know, I'm actually feeling pretty empty right now. See where my little red dot is kind of moving? If I feel a sense of emptiness, now I know, I feel empty. Sometimes just saying how we feel can actually dissolve the feeling a little bit, the intensity of it. Excuse me. So feeling empty, maybe that's how you're feeling. Next question, how do I want to feel? Well, I would love to feel happy. I would love to feel fulfilled. Okay. If you would like to feel fulfilled, then the question is, what helps you feel fulfilled? Is it a task list and having a daily to-do? Is it signing up for a new fitness regime and a new fitness class? Is it hanging out with your family and really being a good person in your community? What is it that helps you feel fulfilled? Whatever it might be, that could be something that you begin to ask yourself that'll help you ultimately, like I said, get to know yourself. How do you feel? How do you want to feel? And then what do you need to do in order to feel that way? This is something that you all should be doing every single day. I mean, even during this quarantine time, checking in with yourselves. How do you feel? How do you want to feel? And what can you do to feel that way? So being intentional. And again, this is mental work. It's not easy. It's work. It takes effort. So the wheel here is just a good tool to use. So now what else can help? These are some strategies, pieces of guidance that I've kind of come up with throughout the years that I've been working with athletes that I've found to be pretty helpful. The first of which is what I call zoom in, zoom out. And so that's really practicing different perspectives. So going from thinking big picture to thinking immediate now. You know, immediate now, zooming into right now, you probably feel pretty lost. Maybe you feel lost and pretty, you know, sad. It's easy to feel like your world's ending when you're so zoomed in on right now. So sometimes a helpful tool is to what I call zoom out and really allow yourself to see big picture. So instead of seeing this chapter, this page is ending, zoom out of the whole book of life and you'll see this is just one chapter. The next chapter is even better. So begin to like play around with the zooming and see what makes you feel good. You know, sometimes zooming out really can help you gain some perspective on your life and see that sport is a big part of who you are, but it is not all of you. The next piece of advice I have is refocusing your energy to celebrate positives. So being able to instead focus on all the bad things and, oh my God, this is the end. I'm losing my career. I'm losing my identity, my teammates. Start to redirect yourself to focus on positives, right? So what can you celebrate from your career? What are you so happy happened? What are some accomplishments that you've achieved, right? And then also, what opportunities lie ahead? It's important to note that it's hard to do this if you're not fully aware of how you're feeling right now. So you'll see in the parentheses I wrote, you know, you have to acknowledge how you feel and accept it first. And once you can accept how you feel, practicing gratitude or refocusing your energy to the positives can really be powerful. Celebrate the wins. Celebrate the wins. You know, it's okay to note the losses, feel like you're losing. That's okay. Once you note that you feel that way, then ask yourself, well, what's a good thing? What are some of the good things? And then self-reflection is the biggest piece of advice I give all of my athletes going through transition. Reflect. This first bullet under reflection is something that I hold near and dear to my heart, where the red is. What have you learned from your sport that can be used forever? So again, how do you approach your sport? Honestly, sport is just a construct that allows you to practice being who you are. It helps you redefine and refine who you are and what you stand for, how you want to show up every day. So just because your sport career is over, it doesn't mean you're over. Again, what did you learn from your sport career about yourselves that you want to continue on? So for me, I learned that I really identified as a strong-minded athlete who was very disciplined. I was super disciplined, extra reps, extra practices, everything that I was told to do, plus more. That was just how I was as an athlete, because again, 110%. And so now moving forward into life, 8 years out of college, I'm still a disciplined person. Everything I do, I give a lot of effort into. I am committed and I care. I'm passionate about what I do. I'm driven. Those are things that I learned and really practiced in my sport that are now come natural to me. So my bosses like me because I work really hard and I'm really passionate and I'm driven and I'm disciplined. So what have you learned from your sporting career? What did you learn about yourself? Are you a team player? Is this something that's really important to you? Are you confident? Are you always well prepared? Do you manage your time well? Do you manage stress well? What are things that you've learned about yourself that you can apply to the next chapter of life? And then another question to ask yourself is, what do you want to take with you and what do you want to leave behind? This is just a fun question that you can ask yourself. So, some of you are like, oh my God, everything's ending, but ask yourself what you're excited to not have to deal anymore. Maybe you hate 6 a.m.s. Maybe you hate lifting. Maybe you hate running. Maybe you have an unhealthy relationship with a coach and you're ready to kind of leave that in your past. Whatever it might be, ask yourself, what are you excited to take with you? Like what I said in the first bullet, things about you. And what are you ready to just like leave behind? Say, see you later. There's probably a little bit of a list under both of those categories, but start to reflect and ask yourself those questions. Some more actionable steps that you all can do is to write. And not everyone's a journaler like me, I understand that, but I'm a big proponent of journaling. Writing about your experience, how you are now, how your experience was as an athlete, and being able to really start to understand it. I'm sure all of you are familiar with Kobe Bryant, who passed away tragically in January. But one thing that he did, I actually got to study Kobe Bryant quite extensively for my graduate level major paper to finish graduate school. And one thing that I learned about Kobe Bryant, it was the year he was retiring, so 2016. What he did at the end of his career was write a letter to the sport of basketball. It was a love letter to the sport, what it meant to him, what he gave to the sport, or the sport gave to him. And it was really a chance for him to one, think back and reflect on his experience, and how much the sport has shaped him and how much he has invested in the sport. But it also served as a therapeutic way for him to externalize the sport. So again, all of his glory that he experienced through the sport, that was great. All the heartache, that was also really impactful. But that he's more than just his sport. He's externalized the sport as something he's experienced, or he's had a relationship with it. So it's kind of like a breakup. You have to find the closure. And for Kobe, I think a lot of his closure with his sport was his ability to write this letter to the sport of basketball and then to play his final season, knowing that it was his final season. So I encourage all of you to write write a letter to your sport. Write a letter to your sport. And then also using the mental skills that you've learned through sports. So things like goal setting, redefining and visualizing what success looks like for you. Get excited and find something to be passionate about. So filling the void, if you were passionate about your sport, what can you be passionate about now? Developing and understand there is a new norm and there's a new way of being. And so you can still show up as yourself and you can still be you, but now it's just in a new construct. So instead of just being in sport, it can be in business, it can be in relationships, it can be in whatever else it might be. But being able to figure out how you can still show up and still be you. And then another mental skill is, again, responding to the situation instead of reacting. Reacting is letting your emotions take over. Responding is making a choice in how you want to then act after something happens. So what you can do to help yourself, this is, again, more reflection. Considering other elements of who you are. What makes you you? I use this analogy of like a bouquet of flowers or like a thing of balloons, like birthday balloons. Picture each flower in the bouquet being a different element of who you are, a different layer of who you are, right? So for me, the basketball player is the new college basketball player, the student, the friend, the daughter, the sister, all these different areas of who I am, and these are different elements of me. If one flower wilts, right, the basketball flower wilts and I throw it away because it's a dead flower, it's gone. That doesn't mean I don't have a bouquet of flowers anymore. It just means that one flower is kind of removed. So what else makes me me? So what's in your own bouquet of flower? What are other areas of yourself? What are other elements of who you are? Being able to prepare for this. Know that you're in the midst of a change. Know it's going to be challenging. Again, you're going through the process of mourning a loss, so you're grieving. But this quote, failing to prepare is preparing to fail. If you just ignore all of this and pretend you're fine, if you're not, it's going to catch up to you and bite you in the butt. So really being able to plan for success, prepare and plan for a successful transition out of sport. So maybe that means using supports that exist, like Ray Patterson, the FAR. Maybe it's SAC, Shannon Bolhart, who's the advisor of SAC. Maybe it's fellow alumni. Maybe it's teammates, coaches, athletes who've experienced this as well, family members, people that you can have the conversation with and feel connected with, who can understand and care about you. Being able to use those people who exist for a very specific reason. One thing that I kind of want to close with all of you is this right here. And it's the best advice that I was given when I was an athlete and when I was transitioning out of sport. So I was a senior in college. I thought I was playing professionally after I graduated, apparently, since I never thought about life beyond sport. And I had a phone call with one of my dad's friends. I'm going to go to myself. So I had a phone call with one of my dad's friends who happened to be a scout for an NBA team. He was a scout for the Orlando Magic at the time. And I always thought it was so cool that I knew him. He played Division I basketball. He played professionally, and then he became a scout for the NBA. So he had a very uniquely special experience being in the sport world. And so he and I had a phone call after I graduated, or when I was about to graduate. I don't remember the exact timing. But essentially, I was struggling with what next, because I never had to think about what was next until I was literally about to graduate and had no clue what was next. And so he and I had a phone call. And one thing that stuck out to me, I don't even know if he knows how important and influential this conversation was to me at the time, but one thing he had said to me that really stuck was for me to really ask myself, what part of sport did I love? What was it about being a basketball player that I really, really just loved and was passionate about? Was it the strategy, the X's and O's? Was it the physical exertion, waking up and grinding and being fatigued physically? Was it the competition, being better than my opponent? Was it hard work and just working hard and seeing results? What the heck was it? Because based on that, right, I could still chase that. So if I really love the X's and O's and the strategy behind basketball, guess what? I could look into coaching, right? If I really like the physical exertion of working my butt off, okay, join a CrossFit gym, right? If I really liked just working hard and getting results, which is what I discovered I really loved, then I could still do that. I can still chase that desire, that high, right? Get my fix of working hard and seeing results. So that question alone was so monumental for me. What did I love about my sport? And how could I chase that to continue to experience it from time and time again as I move on in my life in different chapters? So I think the most important piece for me to really share with all of you is that it might feel like it's the end of the world right now. It might feel like you have no idea what you're doing. You're confused, you're lost, you're stuck, you're sad, you're depressed, you're anxious, you're stressed. All of these things, plus now we're in this social distancing phase and remote learning where stress is amplified. I want you all to really take a look in the mirror and tell yourselves it's going to be okay. And tell yourselves, as cliche as it sounds, that your sport has always been a really big part of who you are. Huge. It's helped you define yourself. It's helped you develop. It's helped you mature. It's helped you connect with your best friends. There's so much that your sport has given you and that you've given your sport. It's been a huge part of your life. But it's equally important to understand it is not all that you are. You are not only an athlete. No one is only an athlete. So I want you all to really, really remind yourselves, do the work day in and day out, and tell yourselves, remind yourselves, support yourselves, surround yourselves with people who will remind you this. You're so much more than an athlete. It's a big part of who you are, but it is not all that you are. What you do does not define who you are. You are a person with values, and how you show up every day, whether it's to work or to a relationship or to rest and stress and management and self-care, or to your sport, how you show up and how you kind of navigate, that's who you are. You are not just your sport production. That's silly. Just like a professor is not just a professor. Just like a mom is not just a mom, right? All these people have these roles. We all have roles. Athlete is a big one. We all have these roles, but they're not the essence of who we are. So again, think of that bouquet of flowers. It is one flower in the bouquet. It is not the entire bouquet. So the last thing that I want to close on is a really cliched quote. I'm all about quotes, but it's really cliched. And it essentially says, it's really short, everything will fall into place. Be patient. Be patient with yourselves. Be patient with this process. Be patient with the new norm. Allow yourself space to feel what you're feeling, and then give yourself grace and kindness so that you can navigate through this as good as possible, or as well as possible. So I will end with the thought of just being kind to yourselves. If you're ever having trouble with that and you're really having a hard time with all of this, or you want to know more, please contact me. I am always available. I am always here to help. And I really encourage all of you to do what you can to help yourselves as you navigate this new norm. It's not easy. I've been there. I've hit my head against a wall many times trying to figure out who I was beyond sport. You know, I still struggle with it. If I'm being completely honest with you, 8 years later, I still have a hard time. I still wish that I played basketball. I still wish that I was in college. I still wish that I could be an athlete and actively participate. But I also do the mental work every single day to remind myself that that chapter, just because it's over, doesn't mean that it goes away. In my book of life, the chapter of athletic participation is still there. So if ever I'm feeling sad or discouraged, or if I miss it, I just look back on that chapter and I'm so grateful for all the experiences that I did have. So be good to yourselves, be kind to yourselves, find support, find people who care and who want to listen, who understand, and reflect on how you're feeling and then what you need to do in order to feel better, whatever that looks like for you. But I'm here for all of you. I'm here to support and to encourage. I'm here to offer advice and guidance. So let me know how I can help you. Your coaches and administration are here for you as well. This is a tough time in life. So please, please, please be kind to yourselves, be kind to others. And I look forward to talking with all of you very soon. Thank you guys for listening.